We are back here on the Now Morning Show. Man, Rockers have me fired up, all during the break and all, you have me fired up. But we'll continue that conversation because, it's very important that we inspire. And we were saying during the break, Rockers, that so many people don't see behind the scenes and the amount of work that goes in. But I trust that somebody out there is inspired to say, yes, I can get off my bed this morning and get it done, get the job done. This is a brand new day. It's the first day of the rest of your life. It's the first day of the rest of life of the country. And we're talking about the economy of the country as we continue this morning. We join no stranger to the program, Dr. Keith Nurse across in St. Lucia. He's, of course, the principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis College, a highly renowned, world-renowned economist as well. Dr. Nurse, good morning.
Good morning to you. How are you?
I am doing well, I don't know if you stayed up all night watching results and all of that across in St. Lucia.
Yes, I got most of the results.
Okay.
Yes.
What do you make of the outcome of the general elections?
Well, there are several key takeaways. I think the first is that, congratulations to the People's National Movement for holding on to the realm of power for Trinidad and Tobago. The 22-19 result really speaks to really a traditional scenario where basically outside of a few seats, most of the seats are well defined. Most of them are safe seats. So it's really only in the marginals, as they're called, that we have some contestation for winning the election. And Tobago, as per usual, is a critical factor. So without those two seats, we know that the PNM would be in a significant bind. And so the role of the PDP in particular with Watson Duke was a critical factor.
Yeah.
And then we saw that, Trinidad and Tobago has actually generated more political parties than anywhere else in the Caribbean. And we saw that again with this election. So that's another key takeaway. Why is it that Trinidad generates so many new political parties?
What does that say? What does that? What does that say about the politics of the country when you have double-digit political parties in a population size of 1.3 million?
Well, I think it's a sense of openness that in Trinidad and Tobago anyone can aspire to the political arena, but it also says that really this is a two-party system. So except for the NAR, who made a significant, splurge into the arena, that period when the NAR was in control of the government really is an exception to the rule. So the rule is the two-party structure. And in fact, we've become even more concentrated in this arena now, whereby it's PNM and UNC, and many of the other smaller parties haven't, been able to gain any ground. So the COP has basically dissipated, one can argue, which in many respects is a lead-off from the NAR experience. And so we're now back to a two-party system almost. So that's another key takeaway from this election.
And is there a way to move away from tribal voting, you think?
Well, we've been discussing that for a long time. But as you could see when you see the map of the results, the PNM takes Tobago on the east-west corridor, as well as San Fernando, and then the rest is the UNC. So that's very traditional. So we are back to where we almost started in terms of electoral politics in Trinidad. And so in effect, the country is stuck in a model, in a framework that doesn't allow for us to do several of the things we've been talking about for a long time. So constitutional change and transformation needs to happen. We've been talking about that for a long time now, but without a two-thirds majority on either side, which may never ever be possible given the structures that we have in place. So how do you move that? How do you move forward with that? Becomes a critical question that we all have to grapple with.
Okay, and Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bissessar did not concede last evening, and she also called for a recount of 3 marginals. What do you make of this?
Yeah. Well, it's a constitutional right, democratic right to ask for a recount if there is considered to be some irregularities and so on. We will find out in the coming days what's the result of all of that. I suspect, though, that there's not too much to be assessed from that standpoint. But you remember, Trinidad and Tobago is fairly lucky, and it's really testimony to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that our elections and the handover and the transitions from one political party to another have largely been seamless, without political incidents. Political violence is very low, almost minimal.
Yeah.
We just have to look at some of our neighbors to the south to see how difficult those transitions can be and how polarized the populations are. So even though we still think about tribal politics in Trinidad as problematic, you go to Guyana or Suriname, it's even more of a problematic scenario there than it is here. So Trinidad and Tobago, and you see it in terms of some of the areas of contestation where you have Ashagonas or Abarataria, Arima, San Fernando. So we have some hotly contested areas whereby the ethnic or tribal politics really has to contend. And so it means then from a political standpoint, from a policy standpoint, the parties have to grapple with these issues rather than shove them aside.
Yeah.
So that's one of the saving graces for Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah. And there are some who, I know social media and WhatsApp messages were switching and going crazy last evening about the whole comparison between Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago and whether or not we may see a playing out. Is that a possibility at all with regard to the recount that Kamna Persad-Bissessar is seeking?
No, I don't. We're not in the same category. And really, in part, it has to do with the strength of our institutions. And so I think the EBC has done a very good job in given the context.
Yeah.
They managed, I think, the COVID scenario very well. So kudos to the EBC on that account. So Trinidad and Tobago is, if you look at the structure of ethnic politics in Trinidad and Tobago compared to Guyana, they're not easily comparable. Partly because in Trinidad and Tobago's case, we have constituencies that are heavily contested, at least 6 to 9 heavily contested seats where either party could win given the configurations and the transformations and the boundaries, for example, as well as the demographic changes.
Yeah, Dr. Nurse, as you mentioned demographic changes, earlier we spoke about the tribal voting, and I know that yesterday's turnout of the youth vote was very, very important, and I think that it had a big impact on what happened last night in terms of the results. Do you think that the youth vote can impact the tribal voting? Do you think the two are related? Are you hearing me, Dr. Nurse?
Dr. Nurse?
Dr. Nurse?
Yes, hello?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Dr. Nurse?
Okay, I wonder if, Dr. Nurse, are you hearing me? Okay, I think we need to take a break. That's such a great question, Rogan. All right, I don't know if he's here. We're going to take a break and come back with Dr. Keith Nurse after this. Technology, guys, but stay with us. Excellent conversation here with Dr. Keith Nurse, principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis College in St. Lucia. Okay, so we've sorted out that technical glitch right there, but it's okay because these things happen, especially as we're working in this new normal environment with Zoom and Skype and so on. We have on the line Dr. Keith Nurse, principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis College and economist, world-renowned economist at that. And before we went to the break, Rokas, you had a question which you're going to repeat so that Dr. Nurse can...
Yeah, Dr. Nurse, are you there with us? You can hear me clearly now?
I can hear you well.
Fantastic. So last night we saw the youth vote turnout really make an impact on the results. I was wondering if you think that the history of tribal voting can be affected by the youth vote and if it would change the dynamics of that.
Yeah, the youth vote is actually very critical. I think the use of social media by both parties, well, in fact, all the parties really made a huge difference. I think political campaigning going forward will have to be using this media to a greater extent. But I would like us to use this media and social media in particular for the economic transformation and social transformation process, so that some of the things that have worked in the campaign should be used in everyday communication with the population. I'm not yet convinced that that we're going to break out of the tribal politics with the results we're seeing with the youth just yet. I still think we're still divided along ethnic lines and geographic lines almost.
Yeah.
That we still have to see where that leads us.
Dr. Nurse, I know you've been following the program, and we had Dr. Marlene Atz on earlier, and she indicated many things, but three that jumped out at us, which is realigning the economy away from oil and gas, but needing to tie in education when we do that with regard to diversification. And she also spoke about the involvement of the private sector as we move forward. And we heard Dr. Keith Rowley indicating that the next 2 years would be challenging, but beyond that, once we pull through, we should have a brighter future. How do you weigh in on these two conversations?
Well, I heard the Prime Minister talk about in the next 2 years being very difficult. He talked about the importance of the agriculture sector, digitalization, he mentioned in particular, and so on. We need more specifics, all right? So what do we mean by digitalization? So for example, the education sector is now going to be driven by what we call digital education, online e-learning and so on. But you have to address the digital divide. So I know the UNC talked about a laptop for all kids and all children. Actually, this is now a necessity. We need every home and every child that's at school to have a device, and for that device to be accessible online and so forth. So digitalization and digital education has to be a priority, especially in the COVID context, as we've seen with the primary school kids having to be pulled back out of primary school with the increase in infections, sporadic and possibly even community spread taking place in Trinidad and Tobago at the current moment. So digitalization is not just an economic term, it has to do also with the educating of the population. Also, digitalization is being used to track populations in terms of public health. So public health is a real big issue in a COVID context. How can we push further in that area? Yeah. So preventative health. I didn't see much of debate or discussion about public health on the campaign trail. In many respects, most of the discussions on the campaign trail were very stereotypical. And there's some growth areas in the global economy and in the with potential for the national economy that weren't captured at all in many respects.
Such as?
The growth of the green economy, the circular economy, are huge growth areas for Trinidad and Tobago. Then the quantum of waste that we generate is off the charts. So we need to address that. And that generates lots of employment.
Yeah.
Green jobs are huge benefit to the economy. And then there's the blue economy, the maritime economy. Trinidad and Tobago is blessed with we are islands. But there's a huge potential there, particularly interlinked with tourism, which we need to revive, especially for Tobago's sake. So tourism, again, was underplayed, I found, in the discussions on the campaign trail. So how do we rectify that? Becomes another critical area for growth. And then of course, creative industries is something I think that you and I are very wedded to.
Yes.
But there are huge opportunities there, splicing the education sector with the creative industries.
Oh, wow.
So, for example, the gamification of knowledge.
Yes.
What are the opportunities there? animation for education, and the list goes on. So rather than just seeing
and
the
you know,
education
Keith,
sector, the social sector
what you're speaking about there,
as an economic sector as well.
Right, but Keith, what you're speaking about there is actually happening in pockets, isolated pockets in Trinidad and Tobago. So people like Camille Salvan Abrahams with animation, and Dr. Freddie James with regards to the gamification, and partnering with the university out of Finland and the University of the West Indies and bringing teams together. It's happening in pockets, but I think what you're saying is escalating it at the level of government with regard to moving it forward as a sector that can be developed for national import. Yes?
Yeah. And I mean, so often we think of digitalization as purely from a consumption standpoint. So everyone has a mobile phone, everyone's on Wi-Fi, etc., where we're downloading content from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
We need to be uploading content. And so issues like e-commerce need to be now emphasized to a greater degree. Digital trade, and even, there's digital taxation related, yes. And then there's the fintech industries, the finance industry. So you have to be able to collect your money, right? So ultimately, we need to the banking sector upgrade so that we utilize some of these technologies to a greater degree. Things are moving very quickly in the global economy. Blockchain technologies are moving very rapidly and escalating into new arenas throughout our daily lives.
Well,
there are huge opportunities.
We can talk for hours, Dr. Keith Nurse, but we don't have hours. We just have a few more minutes on the show, and we're going to have to stick a pin in it right here. But I know you're going to be back with us at some point in the future because you are my Sanjay Gupta. I told you that already.
It's my pleasure.
All right, thank you so much. That was Dr. Keith Nurse across in St. Lucia, principal of the Arthur Lewis College, and he, he advises to the UN and the EU and the ACP and all over the world as an economist and a son of the soil of Trinidad
and
Tobago.
But also the creative industries as well. I know that he wrote the cultural policy draft for St. Kitts, and he was a part of
done a lot of research,
Trinidad and Tobago as well.
A lot of research, and on all the carnivals around the world and so on.